Dr. Elena Morales walked down the long hallway of Pacific Northwest University's Forensic Science Department. Her footsteps echoed against the polished floor as she clutched her research proposal tightly in her hands. At 42 years old, Elena had earned respect in her field, but this project would push boundaries like never before. The department meeting room fell silent as she entered. 5 senior faculty members sat around the table, their faces showing a mix of curiosity and concern. Dean Harrison, a tall man with graying hair and thick glasses, motioned for her to take a seat. "Dr. Morales, please explain your research proposal to the committee," he said, his voice formal but not unkind. Elena took a deep breath. "As you know, our understanding of human decomposition has gaps. We can estimate time of death, but many variables affect the process. My team proposes a real-time study using specialized cameras placed inside sealed coffins." Professor Jenkins, an older woman with 30 years in forensic pathology, frowned. "You want to film dead bodies decomposing? That seems excessive." "Not just film," Elena explained, opening her folder to show the technical diagrams. "We've designed special cameras with infrared capability and environmental sensors. They will record data 24 hours a day and transmit it securely to our lab computers." The room grew tense as the committee members exchanged looks. "And who exactly would be your subjects?" Dr. Chen asked, his voice careful and measured. "We would only work with donors who specifically consent to this research before death," Elena said firmly. "And we follow all ethical guidelines for handling human remains." Dean Harrison leaned forward. "The potential benefits?" Elena's eyes lit up. This was the part she felt most passionate about. More accurate time-of-death calculations would help solve murders that have gone cold. We could help identify remains with greater precision, and we might discover new stages of decomposition that current research has missed. The committee asked questions for over an hour. They raised concerns about ethics, security, and public perception. Elena answered each question directly, showing she had thought through the challenges. "Where would you conduct this research?" Professor Jenkins asked. "We have access to a secure facility 3 miles from campus. It's isolated and has the controlled environment we need," Elena explained. "Security cameras, limited access, and proper ventilation systems are already in place." As the meeting wrapped up, Elena felt hopeful but nervous. This kind of research had never been done before. Some would call it disturbing or disrespectful, but she truly believed it would advance forensic science and help solve crimes. 3 days later, Elena received an email from Dean Harrison. Her heart raced as she opened it. "After careful consideration, the committee has approved your research with the following conditions." Elena smiled as she read the list of reasonable safety precautions and ethical guidelines. They would need to find willing donors, secure additional funding, and build the specialized equipment. Her team of 3, herself, technology specialist Dr. James Chen, and graduate student Lisa Ortega, would have their work cut out for them. What Elena didn't know was that their research would soon take an unexpected turn. The cameras they so carefully designed would capture something none of them could explain, something that would make them question everything they understood about death itself. 2 weeks after their meeting, Elena received the call she had been expecting but dreading. Thomas Wilkins had passed away peacefully in his sleep. His daughter Jennifer, through her tears, confirmed that she would honor her father's wishes. The research would begin. The team had 48 hours to prepare everything according to protocol. James worked through the night, making final adjustments to the cameras and testing the data transmission system. Lisa prepared the documentation and checklists required by the ethics committee. Elena coordinated with the mortuary that would help transport Thomas to their research facility. "All systems are operational," James reported, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He placed 2 camera units on the workbench. Each was about the size of a soda can, with a dark lens on one end and a small blinking light showing its active status. The primary camera will record visible light, while the secondary has infrared capability for night recording. Lisa looked up from her laptop. "I prepared all the documentation. The university's legal team approved the final consent forms." The research facility sat on university land, 3 miles from the main campus. It was a plain concrete building, previously used for agricultural studies. The team had converted one room into their sterile research space with controlled temperature and humidity. Adjacent to it was a small monitoring room filled with computers and recording equipment. The morning of the setup, a somber mood fell over the team. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. This was Thomas Wilkins, a man they had met, a scientist who believed in their work. The mortuary van arrived at exactly 9 a.m. Two attendants carefully wheeled in a simple coffin made of unvarnished pine. Following Thomas's wishes, no embalming had been performed, allowing the natural decomposition process to occur. Elena stepped forward. "We'll take it from here." She signed the transfer paperwork as the attendants left quietly. James and Elena worked methodically, both wearing full protective gear including masks, goggles, and gloves. They opened the coffin to place the cameras and sensors. Thomas looked peaceful, dressed in the blue suit his daughter said he had chosen for this purpose. Elena felt a moment of hesitation, a human reaction to what they were about to do. Then she remembered Thomas's enthusiasm for the project and continued with their work. "Primary camera will be positioned here," James said, carefully mounting the first device at the foot of the coffin, angled toward Thomas's body. "Secondary infrared camera will go here." He placed it near the head of the coffin, giving them another viewing angle. Lisa monitored the camera feeds from the adjacent room. "Both cameras are transmitting clearly," she called over the intercom. Elena placed small environmental sensors at strategic points in the coffin. These will monitor temperature, humidity, and chemical compositions in the air. The final step was to secure the coffin lid. Before they closed it, Elena placed a small object beside Thomas, a microbiology textbook he had written 30 years earlier. His daughter had sent it along, saying he would want it with him on his final research project. When everything was sealed, the team gathered in the monitoring room. 3 large screens displayed the camera feeds. Thomas's still form was clearly visible from 2 angles. "Recording has begun," James announced, typing commands into the main computer. "Data will be backed up every hour to the secure server." Elena looked at the screens and spoke softly. "Thank you, Professor Wilkins." The first day passed uneventfully. The cameras recorded exactly what they expected to see: the still body of Thomas Wilkins in a sealed coffin. Little did they know that in the coming weeks, these same cameras would capture something that would shake their scientific understanding to its core. 3 weeks passed since the team had sealed Thomas Wilkins in the research coffin. The initial excitement had given way to routine. Every morning at 9 a.m., Elena, James, and Lisa would gather in the monitoring room to review the previous day's footage and record their observations. Day 21, Elena spoke clearly into the recorder as James pulled up the latest footage. Subject showing expected signs of decomposition consistent with 21 days post-mortem in a sealed environment. The cameras captured exactly what forensic science predicted. The team had seen the gradual changes to Thomas's body, the discoloration of skin, the natural bloating, and the beginning stages of breakdown. It wasn't pleasant to watch, but it was scientifically valuable. "The temperature sensors show a consistent 2-degree increase from when we started," Lisa noted, marking it on her chart. "That matches our predictions based on bacterial activity." James yawned as he cycled through the different camera views. "Nothing unusual in the overnight footage. Same gradual changes we've been seeing." "You look tired," Elena observed. "I was here until midnight reviewing some of the infrared data," James admitted. "I thought I saw something interesting in the heat patterns, but it turned out to be nothing." He rubbed his eyes. "Just a weird shadow effect from the camera angle." "We need to pace ourselves," Elena reminded him. "This is a 6-month project. We can't burn out in the first month." Lisa looked up from her notes. "Do we really need to review the footage every day? The changes are so gradual that we might not see anything significant day to day." Elena considered this. "You might be right. What if we moved to reviewing the night footage every 3 days instead of daily? We'd still check the daytime recordings and sensor data every day." "That would help," James agreed. "The system is set to alert us if there are any sudden changes in temperature or movement detection anyway." The team established their new routine. Mornings would be spent reviewing daytime footage and checking sensor readings. Night footage would be reviewed every 3 days unless the system flagged something unusual. The following week passed uneventfully. Their research was progressing well, gathering valuable data that would help forensic scientists better understand the decomposition process. On day 26, Jennifer Wilkins visited the research facility. She stood quietly in the monitoring room, looking at the screens showing her father's coffin. Is it helping? She asked. Is his contribution making a difference? Elena placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Absolutely. The data we're gathering is more detailed than anything we've had before. Professor Wilkins is still teaching us, still contributing to science. Jennifer wiped away a tear and nodded. You would be pleased to hear that. He always said that death was just another biological process, nothing to fear. After Jennifer left, the team continued with their work. That evening, James set up the system to record through the night as usual. I've adjusted the infrared sensitivity, he told Elena before leaving. We were getting some strange light artifacts at around 2 a.m. the past few nights. Probably just some reflection from the metal fittings in the coffin, but I wanted to clean up the image. Good thinking, Elena said. We need the clearest data possible. Little did they know that the light artifacts James mentioned were the first hints of something inexplicable happening inside the sealed coffin. The adjusted camera settings would now capture it clearly, something that would challenge everything they understood about death and decomposition. That night, as the building sat quiet and empty, the cameras continued their silent watch. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the sensors recorded a sudden drop in temperature inside the coffin. The infrared camera captured the first clear images of what would soon have the entire team screaming in disbelief. On the morning of day 27, the research team arrived at their usual times. Lisa was first, carrying 3 coffees in a cardboard tray. She set them on the desk in the monitoring room and began checking the daytime sensor readings from the previous day. Everything looks normal, she muttered to herself, taking a sip of coffee. The temperature graph showed expected patterns, rising slightly during the day and dropping at night. Elena arrived next, looking fresh and focused. Good morning, Lisa. Anything interesting in yesterday's data? Not yet. I was just checking the basic readings. All normal so far. James rushed in 15 minutes late, his hair uncombed and dark circles under his eyes. Sorry I'm late. I couldn't sleep last night. Elena handed him his coffee. Bad dreams? No, just this weird feeling about the research. I can't explain it. He sat down at the computer and logged in. Today's the day we checked the night footage, right? Elena nodded. Yes, 3 days since our last review of the overnight recordings. The three gathered around the main screen as James pulled up the infrared footage from the previous night. He fast-forwarded through the early evening hours, showing nothing unusual, just the still form of Thomas Wilkins in the sealed coffin, appearing as a cooling mass in the infrared spectrum. Let's start around midnight, Elena suggested. That's when you mentioned seeing those light artifacts before. James slowed the footage to normal speed at 12 o'clock a.m. For about 2 hours, nothing unusual appeared. The body continued its natural decomposition process, with the expected heat signatures showing bacterial activity. Wait, what's that? Lisa suddenly pointed at the screen. The timestamp read 2:15 a.m. The temperature reading at the bottom of the screen began to drop rapidly. In just 2 minutes, it fell from 68 degrees Fahrenheit to 58 degrees Fahrenheit inside the sealed coffin. That's impossible, Elena whispered. A sealed environment can't lose heat that quickly without some external cooling source. As they watched in growing confusion, a strange mist began to form around Thomas's body at 2:17 a.m. In the infrared footage, it appeared as swirling blue patterns against the warmer red background of the coffin interior. Is that condensation? Lisa asked, leaning closer to the screen. But what would cause such rapid condensation in a sealed environment? James shook his head. This doesn't make sense. The sensors show the humidity level actually dropped during this time. The mist continued to form, but instead of behaving like normal water vapor, it began to move in distinct patterns. It swirled in perfect circles, then straight lines, forming geometric shapes above Thomas's chest. That's not random movement, Elena said, her voice barely audible. Those are perfect shapes. The three scientists watched in stunned silence as the mist formed more complex patterns. Triangles merged into squares, then into more intricate designs that seemed almost intentional. Play the regular camera footage, Elena said suddenly. Let's see if this shows up in visible light too. James quickly switched to the standard camera view. The screen showed only darkness, with Thomas's form barely visible in the low light. No mist, no patterns, nothing unusual. It's only appearing on the infrared spectrum, James whispered. How is that possible? At 2:23 a.m., the mist patterns suddenly became more organized. They formed what looked like concentric circles, pulsing slightly as if alive. The temperature is still dropping, Lisa noted, pointing to the reading of 51 degrees Fahrenheit now. This defies everything we know about thermodynamics in a closed system. As they continued watching, the patterns grew more complex by the minute. Elena gripped the edge of the desk, her scientific mind racing to find a rational explanation for what they were seeing. We need to check the cameras, James said finally. There must be some malfunction. But deep down, all three scientists knew that what they were witnessing was real, and that tomorrow night's footage would reveal something even more shocking. The team barely slept that night. Each went home with a copy of the strange footage, searching for any logical explanation. By morning, they were back at the research facility before dawn, drawn by a mixture of scientific curiosity and unease. I checked the camera systems 3 times, James said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. There's no malfunction. Both cameras are working perfectly. Elena paced the small monitoring room. I reviewed all the literature on decomposition and gas formation. Nothing explains the patterns we saw or the temperature drop. Lisa entered, carrying a thick folder. I printed the key frames from the footage. I thought seeing them on paper might help us spot something we missed. The three gathered around the conference table as Lisa spread out the images in sequence. The progression was clear, random mist forming into increasingly complex geometric patterns. Let's watch it again at half speed, Elena suggested. And let's focus on what happens after 2:30 a.m. We stopped watching around 2:25 yesterday. James nodded and queued up the footage. They watched the now familiar beginning, the temperature drop, the mist formation, the geometric patterns. As the timestamp hit 2:26 a.m., they leaned forward. Keep watching, James whispered, though no one had suggested stopping. At 2:29 a.m., the pattern suddenly shifted. The concentric circles elongated, twisting into a new shape. By 2:31 a.m., the pattern had formed what looked unmistakably like a double helix, the structure of DNA. That's impossible, Lisa gasped. The DNA-like structure began to rotate slowly above Thomas's chest, as if being displayed for the cameras. It spun 3 complete rotations, then suddenly collapsed back into random mist at 2:34 a.m. Elena's face had gone white. James involuntarily screamed, jumping back from his chair. The sudden noise made Lisa knock over her coffee, spilling it across the printed images. That's a DNA molecule. A perfect representation, Elena whispered, her scientific mind refusing to accept what her eyes had clearly seen. James stood trembling in the corner. This can't be happening. There has to be an explanation. Elena suddenly moved toward the door. We need to check the coffin. Now. What? We can't open it. Lisa protested. That would compromise the entire experiment. We're beyond that now, Elena said firmly. Something is happening in there that defies scientific explanation. We need to see for ourselves. The 3 scientists donned their protective gear and entered the research room where the coffin sat, undisturbed since they had sealed it 27 days ago. The room was cold, much colder than it should have been. The environmental controls are set to 70 degrees, James said, checking the wall thermostat, but it's reading 58 in here. Elena approached the coffin cautiously. Do you feel that? The air feels charged somehow. They stood around the sealed pine box, hesitating. Finally, Elena spoke. James, get the tools. We're opening it. Lisa placed a hand on her arm. Elena, are you sure? This goes against protocol. Protocol doesn't account for what we just saw, Elena replied. As lead researcher, I'm making the call. James returned with the tools needed to open the sealed coffin. With shaking hands, he began removing the special screws they had used to secure it. The team held their breath as the final screw came out. Elena nodded to the others. On 3, we lift together. 1, 2, 3. They raised the lid slowly, unsure of what they might find. As light fell into the coffin for the first time in nearly a month, all 3 scientists gasped in unison. Thomas Wilkins's body lay there, showing expected decomposition. But surrounding him, clinging to the coffin's interior walls, was something none of them had ever seen before, something that would make them question everything they thought they knew about death and what comes after. The three scientists stared in disbelief at what they saw inside the coffin. Covering the interior walls was a thin film of shimmering, translucent material. It wasn't quite liquid and wasn't quite solid. In the bright lights of the research room, it glistened with an almost metallic quality. "What is that?" Lisa whispered, leaning closer but afraid to touch it. James carefully took samples using sterile swabs and placed them in collection vials. "I've never seen anything like this. It's almost like a biofilm, but it's reflecting light in an unusual way." Elena examined Thomas's body. Apart from the expected decomposition, there was nothing unusual about the corpse itself. The strange substance was only on the walls of the coffin, not on Thomas. "We need to analyze these samples immediately," Elena said, her scientific mind taking over despite her fear. "Let's reseal the coffin and get to the lab." They carefully closed the coffin and headed to the university's main research laboratory. For the next 48 hours, the team barely left the lab. They ran test after test on the mysterious substance. On the second day, James burst into the conference room where Elena was reviewing data. "I found something. The substance contains a previously unknown strain of bacteria." Elena looked up from her papers. "Bacteria? Just bacteria?" "Not just any bacteria," James explained, excitement replacing his earlier fear. "It's producing bioluminescent proteins similar to those found in deep-sea creatures, but with a completely different structure." Lisa joined them, carrying more test results. "The bacteria feeds on the gases released during decomposition. That's why it formed on the coffin walls where the gases accumulated." "But that doesn't explain the patterns we saw," Elena pointed out. "Or the temperature drop." James pulled up a computer simulation. "I think I can explain that too. The bacteria produces light in the infrared spectrum, heat energy that our regular cameras couldn't detect, but the infrared camera could. When enough bacteria were active at once, they actually absorbed heat from their surroundings, causing the temperature drop." "And the patterns?" Elena asked. "The bacteria respond to air currents inside the sealed coffin," Lisa explained. As gases moved in particular ways, the bacterial colonies responded by lighting up in sequence. The patterns we saw were actually following the invisible currents of air. "But the DNA shape?" Elena pressed. "That can't be random." James nodded slowly. "That's the most fascinating part. The bacteria seem to arrange themselves based on electrical charges. The human body, even after death, maintains certain electrical patterns as cells break down. What we saw was the bacteria responding to the electrical pattern that was most dominant at that moment. And those patterns happened to look like DNA." Elena was skeptical. "Not exactly," James said. "Our brains recognized it as DNA because that's what we know. But it was actually forming along the electrical pathways that have been established in Thomas's nervous system during life. The double helix is actually a very efficient pattern for electrical conduction." The team spent the next week verifying their findings. They brought in experts from microbiology and physics to confirm their discoveries. Each test supported their explanation. They had discovered a new bacterial strain that produced light in the infrared spectrum and responded to electrical patterns. "We need to name it," Lisa said one evening as they finalized their report. Elena smiled for the first time in days. "I think Wilkinsonia illuminata would be appropriate, don't you?" James nodded. "Thomas would have loved that. A bacteria named after him that literally illuminates the process of death." The scientific explanation brought comfort to the team. What had terrified them was now a groundbreaking discovery that would advance their field. Yet each of them privately wondered if there was something more to what they had witnessed, something beyond their current scientific understanding. The cameras continued recording, and in the nights that followed, Wilkinsonia illuminata continued its beautiful, haunting light show, revealing secrets about death that science was only beginning to understand. 6 months after Thomas Wilkins had been laid to rest in their research coffin, Elena sat in her office reviewing the final data for their paper. The discovery of Wilkinsonia illuminata had changed everything, not just for their small research team, but for the entire field of forensic science. "The Journal of Forensic Sciences just confirmed," Lisa announced, bursting into the office waving her phone. "They're featuring our research on the cover of next month's issue." Elena smiled. Thomas would have loved that. His last contribution to science made the cover. The paper they had written detailed the complete life cycle of the unique bacteria and its practical applications for forensic investigation. The bacteria's predictable growth patterns and response to the chemical changes in decomposing bodies created a new, more precise way to determine time of death. James entered carrying a small potted plant and 3 coffee cups balanced precariously on a folder. "I brought celebration coffee," he said, handing out the cups. "And look what I found in the campus bookstore." He opened the folder to reveal a magazine with their 3 faces on the cover under the headline, "Death's Light: How 3 Scientists Revolutionized Forensic Investigation." "They're calling us pioneers," Lisa said, reading from her phone. The discovery of Wilkinsonia illuminata has been named one of the top 10 scientific breakthroughs of the year. Elena took the magazine, studying their serious faces in the photograph. They looked different now, older somehow, though only 6 months had passed. Some experiences change people forever. "Jennifer Wilkins called this morning," Elena said, setting down the magazine. "She wanted to know if we're coming to the memorial service this weekend. It's been exactly 6 months since Thomas passed." James nodded solemnly. "I'll be there. Without him, none of this would have happened." The team had decided, with Jennifer's permission, to end their research after 6 months as originally planned. Thomas's remains had been cremated the previous week, but not before the team had collected one final sample of the bacteria that now bore his name. In their laboratory, a special incubator housed a thriving colony of Wilkinsonia illuminata. The bacteria was being studied by research teams around the world, with applications reaching far beyond forensic science. Its unusual properties had caught the attention of medical researchers, who were investigating its potential for tracking cancer cells through its response to abnormal electrical patterns. Dr. Harrison called from the university board, Lisa mentioned as she sipped her coffee. "They've approved funding for a new research center focused on thanatology. They want you to lead it, Elena." Elena looked surprised. "Me? But this was a team discovery." "We'll all be part of it," James assured her. "But you had the vision to start this project in the first place. Without your idea to put those cameras in the coffin, we would never have seen what we saw." Elena thought back to that moment when they had first watched the footage, the terror they had felt, the screams that had escaped their lips. What had begun as fear had transformed into wonder and scientific advancement. The following Sunday, the 3 scientists stood together at Thomas Wilkins' memorial service. Jennifer approached them after the ceremony, holding a small package. "Dad wanted you to have this," she said, handing it to Elena. "He left instructions that it should be given to you after your research was complete." Elena carefully opened the package to find a worn notebook. Inside, written in Thomas's neat handwriting, was a quote on the first page. "Science begins in wonder and ends in understanding, but the greatest discoveries happen when we have the courage to look at what makes us scream in fear." Under the quote, Thomas had written a simple message. "Thank you for looking beyond the fear. The light you discovered will help others find their way." Elena closed the notebook, holding it close. In science, as in life, endings often became beginnings. Thomas Wilkins' end had illuminated a new path forward, one that would continue to shine long after they were gone. The 3 scientists stared in disbelief at what they saw inside the coffin. Covering the interior walls was a thin film of shimmering, translucent material. It wasn't quite liquid and wasn't quite solid. In the bright lights of the research room, it glistened with an almost metallic quality. "What is that?" Lisa whispered, leaning closer but afraid to touch it. James carefully took samples using sterile swabs and placed them in collection vials. "I've never seen anything like this. It's almost like a biofilm, but it's reflecting light in an unusual way." Elena had examined Thomas's body. Apart from the expected decomposition, there was nothing unusual about the corpse itself. The strange substance was only on the walls of the coffin, not on Thomas. "We need to analyze these samples immediately," Elena said, her scientific mind taking over despite her fear. "Let's reseal the coffin and get to the lab." They carefully closed the coffin and headed to the university's main research laboratory. For the next 48 hours, the team barely left the lab. They ran test after test on the mysterious substance. On the second day, James burst into the conference room where Alina was reviewing data. I found something. The substance contains a previously unknown strain of bacteria. Alina looked up from her papers. Bacteria? Just bacteria? Not just any bacteria, James explained, excitement replacing his earlier fear. It's producing bioluminescent proteins similar to those found in deep-sea creatures, but with a completely different structure. Lisa joined them, carrying more test results. The bacteria feeds on the gases released during decomposition. That's why it formed on the coffin walls where the gases accumulated. But that doesn't explain the patterns we saw, Alina pointed out. Or the temperature drop. James pulled up a computer simulation. I think I can explain that too. The bacteria produces light in the infrared spectrum, heat energy that our regular cameras couldn't detect, but the infrared camera could. When enough bacteria were active at once, they actually absorbed heat from their surroundings, causing the temperature drop. And the patterns? Alina asked. The bacteria respond to air currents inside the sealed coffin, Lisa explained. As gases moved in particular ways, the bacterial colonies responded by lighting up in sequence. The patterns we saw were actually following the invisible currents of air. But the DNA shape? Alina pressed. That can't be random. James nodded slowly. That's the most fascinating part. The bacteria seem to arrange themselves based on electrical charges. The human body, even after death, maintains certain electrical patterns as cells break down. What we saw was the bacteria responding to the electrical pattern that was most dominant at that moment. And those patterns happened to look like DNA. Alina was skeptical. Not exactly, James said. Our brains recognized it as DNA because that's what we know. But it was actually forming along the electrical pathways that have been established in Thomas's nervous system during life. The double helix is actually a very efficient pattern for electrical conduction. The team spent the next week verifying their findings. They brought in experts from microbiology and physics to confirm their discoveries. Each test supported their explanation. They had discovered a new bacterial strain that produced light in the infrared spectrum and responded to electrical patterns. We need to name it, Lisa said one evening as they finalized their report. Alina smiled for the first time in days. I think Wilkinsonia illuminata would be appropriate, don't you? James nodded. Thomas would have loved that. A bacteria named after him that literally illuminates the process of death. The scientific explanation brought comfort to the team. What had terrified them was now a groundbreaking discovery that would advance their field. Yet each of them privately wondered if there was something more to what they had witnessed, something beyond their current scientific understanding. The cameras continued recording, and in the nights that followed, Wilkinsonia illuminata continued its beautiful, haunting light show, revealing secrets about death that science was only beginning to understand.